Welcome to our Devos this week. We are talking about the director's cut of Mark. We're looking at those last several passages of Mark that most likely were not included in the original manuscripts and were added later in some of the later manuscripts. But again, if you are worried about that or you kind of are confused about what I mean by that, just go back to yesterday. I tried to boil that down to about 7 minutes. And there's a lot smarter people that have written a lot more about this subject online, but it shouldn't challenge your Christianity at all, not in the slightest. It should just make you more aware that when you're reading, some things, are translation issues and not inspiration issues. So with that said, let's take a look at some of the content, because the chapter of Mark that we're in, Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 20, there's some interesting stuff in there. And we see an interesting story, an interesting narrative of something that happens, and we get a good admonition out of it, and that's this. We should always preach the gospel and let God do the rest. We should preach the gospel and let God do the rest. I think a lot of times as Christians, what we do is we tend to want to manage or micromanage all of the process of people becoming Christians. And we are to interact with people, and we expect that they're going to receive it the way that we would receive it, and we are expecting that the results are going to be instantaneous in the way we speak about God. But in reality, what God is holding us accountable to is to preach the gospel, to share the gospel, to talk about Jesus. The Holy Spirit is the one that convicts. The Holy Spirit is the one that reveals. The Holy Spirit is the one who draws. So this is not an issue where you and I are responsible for everything, even if we are completely compelled by the gospel ourselves. It's our responsibility to share it. Nowhere is this more certain than when we look at Mark chapter 16, verses 9 through 11. It says, "Now when he arose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, from whom he had cast out 7 demons." This is a resurrection story with Mary Magdalene. "And she went and told those who had been with him, as they had been mourning and weeping. They mourned and wept. But when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they would not believe it." Sometimes people around you aren't going to believe it. Sometimes people aren't going to believe what you say. So what do? You be faithful anyway. You preach the gospel with truth in season and out of season. You preach the gospel with the grace seasoned into it, so that you are faithful to what you can do when you're dealing with people that don't believe. Mary Magdalene, according to this, they didn't believe her. And in other gospels, it says that when the women appeared and spoke to them, they looked at it as an idle tale that was being told. So there was this resistance to the idea. And we talked about why this is important in proving the resurrection when we looked at our sermon this weekend. But for us, the practical side of this is sometimes people are going to reject your message. God still wants you to try. And God is not holding you accountable for what happens. He's holding you accountable for being faithful to the promptings that he places within your life to share the good news of Jesus Christ. So, even if they might not believe, preach the gospel anyway.